The stone corridor was silent except for the echo of footsteps. Deep beneath Windsor Castle, where tourists never walked and cameras never reached, a single sentry stood guard. His name was Thomas Harlow. He had served the crown for 17 years. He had never once questioned an order. Until today, the woman approaching him wore a tailored navy coat and carried herself with unmistakable authority. Queen Consort Camilla. Her heels clicked against the ancient floor. Behind her, 2 palace officials followed at a respectful distance. She stopped 3 feet from Thomas, her expression calm but firm. "I need access to the vault," she said. Thomas felt his chest tighten. The vault she meant was not just any vault. It was the Queen's private vault, a room that held more than jewels and crowns. It held documents, wills, inheritance records, things that could change everything for the royal family. Things that were meant for specific eyes only, Your Majesty. Thomas began carefully. "I'm afraid I don't have authorization to grant that access." Camilla's eyes narrowed slightly. "I am the Queen Consort. I believe that grants me certain privileges." Thomas swallowed. His hand rested near his radio. He could feel sweat forming under his uniform. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This gets intense. The vault behind him contained something critical. Before Queen Elizabeth passed, she had placed documents inside. Documents that outlined the inheritance meant for Kate and Prince George, protection of titles, protection of properties, safeguards that ensured the direct line to the throne would remain secure. There were whispers in the palace, whispers that someone wanted to see those documents, maybe even alter them. "This vault requires written authorization from the king," Thomas said, keeping his voice steady. "I cannot open it otherwise." Camilla stepped closer. "The king is my husband. I speak on his behalf." "Then I will need that in writing, Your Majesty."
What?
The air between them felt electric. One of the officials behind Camilla stepped forward, holding a folder. "We have the authorization here." Thomas reached for the folder. His training told him to verify everything. He opened it slowly. The document inside bore a signature, but something felt wrong. The ink looked too fresh. The wording was unusual. He had seen official documents before. This one didn't match. "I'll need to confirm this with His Majesty directly," Thomas said. Camilla's face hardened. "That won't be necessary, I'm afraid it is." For a moment, nobody moved. The tension was unbearable. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat. He thought of Kate. He thought of young George, just a boy, unaware that his entire future might hinge on what happened in this corridor. If these documents were tampered with, George could lose claims. Kate could lose protections. The carefully constructed line of succession could be thrown into chaos. "You're refusing me?" Camilla asked quietly. "I'm following protocol, Your Majesty." The official stepped forward again, this time with irritation in his voice. "Do you understand who you're speaking to?" Thomas stood straighter. "I do. And I also understand my duty." What happened next would determine everything. Because in the palace, loyalty was complicated. And sometimes, protecting the crown meant standing against it. Camilla took a slow breath. Then she turned to the official and whispered something Thomas couldn't hear. The official nodded and pulled out a phone. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. Were they calling the king? Or someone else? The silence stretched. Thomas kept his hand near his radio. If this went wrong, he'd need backup. But who could he trust? Palace security was loyal to the crown, yes? But which part of the crown? Then Camilla spoke again, and her words sent ice through Thomas's veins. "You're making a mistake you'll regret." But Thomas didn't move, because he knew something she didn't. Someone had warned him this might happen. Someone who wanted those documents protected at all costs. And now, the real test was beginning. Asterisk, asterisk, 3 hours earlier, Thomas had received an encrypted message. It came through the secure channel used only for matters of highest sensitivity. The sender was anonymous, but the authentication code was genuine. Palace intelligence. The message was brief. The Queen Consort may attempt vault access today. Documents inside protect Cambridge inheritance. Do not allow access without direct verbal confirmation from the king. Trust no written authorization unless verified by 3 witnesses. Thomas had read it twice. Then he deleted it as instructed. But the words burned in his mind. Someone inside the palace knew this was coming. Someone wanted him prepared now. Standing in that corridor with Camilla's cold stare fixed on him, Thomas understood why. The official finished his phone call. His Majesty is unavailable at present, he said stiffly. He's in a meeting with the Prime Minister. Then we wait, Thomas replied. Camilla's jaw tightened. This is absurd. I am not some common visitor. I understand, Your Majesty. But the protocols exist for everyone's protection. What Thomas didn't say was what he'd learned over his years of service. The vault wasn't just protected by locks and guards. It was protected by secrets. Queen Elizabeth had been meticulous. Before her death, she had personally ensured that certain documents were sealed with conditions. Multiple signatures required. Timeframes that had to be honored. She knew that after she was gone, battles would emerge. Battles over power, titles, wealth. She had specifically protected Kate and George. Kate was not born royal. Some in the palace had never fully accepted her. There were whispers that certain family members believed the inheritance should be redistributed. That properties tied to the Prince of Wales should be accessible to others. That George was too young to have so much secured in his name. But Elizabeth had disagreed. She saw Kate as the future. She saw George as the continuation of everything she built. And she put protections in writing. Protections that were now locked behind the vault door Thomas guarded. Camilla turned away, her coat sweeping dramatically. She walked several paces down the corridor, speaking quietly with the officials. Thomas couldn't hear the words, but he could see the frustration in their gestures. Then his radio crackled. Harlow, this is command. We've received a request to grant vault access. Please confirm. Thomas pressed the button. Request denied pending direct authorization from His Majesty. There was a pause. Understood. Stand by. Camilla glanced back at him. She had heard the exchange. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Respect? Anger? It was hard to tell. Then she walked back toward him. You're very dedicated, she said quietly. Thank you, Your Majesty. Do you know what's in that vault? Thomas hesitated. I know enough to know it must be protected. Camilla studied him. My husband's mother was a remarkable woman. But she was also controlling. She made decisions that affect all of us, even from beyond the grave. With respect, Your Majesty, those were her wishes. And what about the wishes of those still living? It was a pointed question. Thomas felt the weight of it. He chose his words carefully. I serve the crown, Your Majesty, all of it. But I also serve the law and protocol that holds it together. Camilla nodded slowly. And if I told you that what's in that vault could harm the family? That it creates divisions rather than unity? Then I would say that His Majesty should make that determination. Not me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she surprised him. You're right, she said softly. Thomas blinked. He hadn't expected that. Camilla turned to her officials. We'll return when the king is available. The officials looked shocked. One started to protest, but Camilla raised a hand, silencing him. She looked back at Thomas one last time. I hope you understand. This isn't over. I understand, Your Majesty. And then she was gone. The clicking of her heels faded down the corridor. The officials followed, one of them throwing a dark glance at Thomas when they were out of sight. Thomas released a breath he didn't know he was holding. His hands were shaking. He pressed his back against the cold stone wall and closed his eyes. But relief didn't come. Because he knew Camilla was right. This wasn't over. Somewhere above him, in the palace's grand rooms, decisions were being made. Phone calls were happening. Pressure was being applied. And Thomas was just one sentry standing between powerful people and what they wanted. His radio crackled again. Arlo, report to the security office immediately. Thomas's stomach dropped. That wasn't a request. It was a summons. Someone wanted to talk to him. and he had a feeling he knew what it was about as he walked toward the stairs. Leaving the vault behind, he wondered if he had just protected Kate and George's future, or if he had simply delayed the inevitable. Either way, the battle had just begun. The security office was located in the East Wing. As Thomas climbed the stone stairs, his mind raced. Would they suspend him? Reprimand him? Transfer him to some remote post where he couldn't cause problems? He reached the oak door and knocked twice. Enter. Inside, 3 people waited. The head of palace security, Commander James Whitfield, sat behind the desk. To his left stood Margaret Ashford, the king's private secretary. And to his right, someone Thomas didn't expect, Lady Susan Hussey, one of Queen Elizabeth's most trusted former ladies-in-waiting. She was 84 years old, elegant, and still sharply intelligent. "Sit down, Harlow," Whitfield said. Thomas sat. His uniform suddenly felt too tight. Whitfield leaned forward. "You denied the Queen Consort access to the vault today, sir?" "I followed protocol." "Protocol?" She believed she had authorization to bypass. "The authorization document was questionable, sir. I requested direct confirmation from His Majesty, as required." Margaret Ashford spoke next. Her voice was crisp, professional. "You put the Queen Consort in an awkward position. She is not accustomed to being questioned by staff. I meant no disrespect, ma'am, but my orders regarding that vault are clear." Lady Susan had been silent until now. She shifted in her chair, and everyone's attention turned to her. When she spoke, her voice carried decades of palace knowledge. "Thomas, what do you think is in that vault?" Thomas hesitated. "I'm not entirely certain, my lady, but you have an idea." He chose honesty. "I believe there are documents that protect certain inheritances, specifically for the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children." Lady Susan nodded. "You're correct. Queen Elizabeth spent the last year of her life ensuring those documents were ironclad. She knew what would happen after she was gone. She knew there would be people who would want to renegotiate, redistribute, challenge." Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "My lady, perhaps this isn't the appropriate forum?" "It's exactly the appropriate forum." Lady Susan interrupted firmly. "This young man did his duty today. He should understand why it mattered." She turned back to Thomas. "When Catherine married William, she entered a family that didn't fully embrace her. You know this?" "Yes." Thomas nodded carefully. Elizabeth saw Catherine differently. She saw strength, dedication, a future queen who would serve with grace. She also saw how vulnerable Catherine's position could be. Catherine has no aristocratic family to protect her, no wealth of her own. Everything she has comes through William. And if something were to happen to William, or if certain people decided to challenge the inheritances, Catherine and her children could be left with nothing. Thomas felt a chill. He had never thought about it that way. "The documents in that vault," Lady Susan continued, "ensured that properties, titles, and certain royal assets are legally protected for Catherine and George, regardless of what happens. They cannot be reassigned, cannot be sold, cannot be touched. Elizabeth made certain of it, and someone wants to change that," Thomas said quietly. "Someone believes it's unfair," Margaret corrected. "That resources should be more evenly distributed among the family. That someone being the Queen Consort?" Thomas asked. The room went very quiet. Commander Whitfield cleared his throat. "We're not here to discuss motivations. We're here to address your actions." But Lady Susan wasn't finished. "Camilla has her own children. Children who have no titles, no royal income, no guaranteed future within the firm. She believes they've been excluded unfairly. She's not wrong to feel protective of them. But she is wrong if she thinks she can undo what Elizabeth put in place." "Lady Susan," Margaret said sharply, "this is highly inappropriate." "The truth often is," Lady Susan replied calmly. She looked at Thomas again. "You did the right thing today. The question is whether you'll be allowed to continue doing it." "What do you mean?" Whitfield answered. "There's pressure from certain quarters to reassign you, move you somewhere less sensitive. Because I followed protocol. Because you made powerful people uncomfortable. Thomas felt anger rising. So I'm being punished for doing my job? You're being reassessed, Margaret said carefully. Palace security requires diplomacy as much as it requires vigilance. Lady Susan stood, her movements slow but deliberate. If you reassign this man, you're sending a message. You're telling everyone that loyalty to the crown means loyalty to whoever has the most influence at the moment. Elizabeth didn't build this institution on that principle. Elizabeth is gone, Margaret said quietly, but her wishes aren't. The tension in the room was suffocating. Thomas sat very still, unsure what to say. His career hung in the balance. But more than that, something larger was at stake. The integrity of the entire system. Whitfield finally spoke. Harlow, you're not being reassigned. Yet, but understand this. The vault situation is delicate. If the king himself requests access for the queen consort, you will grant it. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Dismissed. Thomas stood and saluted. As he turned to leave, Lady Susan spoke one more time. Thomas. He stopped. Watch yourself. Palace walls have ears, and not everyone wants those documents to stay protected. He nodded and left. Outside, the corridor felt colder. Thomas walked slowly, processing everything he'd heard. Catherine vulnerable. George protected by a grandmother he'd barely known. And Camilla fighting for her own children in the only way she knew how. It wasn't black and white. It was messy, human, complicated. But Elizabeth's wishes were clear. And until the king himself told Thomas otherwise, he would guard that vault with his life. What he didn't know was that someone was already planning another way in. Asterisk that night. Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in his small apartment near the palace grounds, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed the day over and over. Camilla's face, Lady Susan's warning, the weight of the vault door he'd refused to open. At 2 a.m, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Thomas almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hello? Thomas Harlow. The voice was male, refined, careful. Who is this? Someone who knows what you did today. Someone who wants to help you understand what's really happening. Thomas sat up, instantly alert. I'm hanging up. Wait, I know about the encrypted message you received. I know who sent it. Thomas froze. Who are you? I work in the king's private office. I can't give you my name, but I can tell you this. The pressure on that vault isn't going to stop. And it's not just coming from the queen consort. Then who? There was a pause. There are financial advisors, estate lawyers, people who believe the royal portfolio needs restructuring. The properties tied to George alone are worth billions. Properties that generate income hold historical value. Some people think it's irresponsible for so much to be locked away for a child. Those were the queen's wishes. The queen is dead, and the living have bills to pay. Thomas felt sick. So this is about money. It's always about money. But it's also about power. About who controls what. The documents in that vault don't just protect Catherine and George. They also limit what others can access, including the king himself. That shocked Thomas. The king can't access his own mother's estate. Not all of it. Not the parts she specifically designated for the direct line. William, Catherine, George, Charlotte, Louise, she put barriers in place. Legal barriers. The king can't simply override them even if he wanted to. And there are people who think he should want to. Hey. Why are you telling me this? Because you're standing at a door that powerful people want opened. And they're not going to ask politely forever. They're going to find another way. What way? I don't know yet. But I know they're working on it. Legal challenges. Looking for loopholes in the documents. Maybe even trying to persuade the king that changing his mother's wishes is in everyone's best interest. Thomas gripped the phone tighter. And what do you want from me? Keep doing what you're doing? Guard that vault. Don't let anyone in without absolute, unquestionable authorization. Because once those documents are accessed, they can be copied, analyzed, challenged, and once that door opens, it might never close again. Who sent you to tell me this? The voice hesitated. Someone who loved Queen Elizabeth very much. Someone who promised her that her wishes would be honored. Then the line went dead. Thomas sat in the darkness, his heart pounding. He wanted to believe the call was genuine. But palace intrigue was full of tricks. Maybe this was a test. Maybe someone was trying to make him paranoid, unstable, unreliable. Or maybe it was all true. The next morning, Thomas returned to his post. The corridor was quiet. Nothing seemed different. But everything felt different. Around midday, a new figure appeared. It wasn't Camilla this time. It was a man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind him walked two other men, also formally dressed. "Good afternoon," the man said pleasantly. "I'm Richard Thornberry, a state counsel for His Majesty. I'm here to conduct a routine inventory of the vault." Thomas's instincts flared. "I wasn't informed of any inventory," Thornberry smiled. "It's standard procedure. Happens quarterly. I have authorization here." He reached into his briefcase and produced a document. Thomas took it. The letterhead was correct. The signature looked official. But his conversation from last night echoed in his mind. Legal challenges? Loopholes? "This will need to be verified," Thomas said. Thornberry's smile thinned. "I've been conducting these inventories for 5 years. You can call Commander Whitfield if you'd like, I will." Thomas stepped aside and radioed Whitfield. The response came quickly. "Authorization confirmed. Allow access for inventory purposes only. You'll accompany them inside." Thomas's stomach sank. But he had his orders. "Very well," he said to Thornberry. "I'll need to be present throughout, of course." Thomas unlocked the vault. The heavy door swung open with a deep groan. Inside, the room was surprisingly small. Stone walls. Climate-controlled. Shelves lined with boxes. Files and several ornate cases containing jewelry and regalia. But Thomas's eyes went to one specific shelf. The one containing the documents in question. They were in a sealed case, marked with the royal seal and dated 3 months before Elizabeth's death. Thornberry noticed his gaze. Yes. The Cambridge protections. Fascinating legal work, really. He set his briefcase down and pulled out a camera. "No photographs," Thomas said immediately. "It's just for inventory records. No photographs. You can make written notes." Thornberry's pleasant expression cracked slightly. "That will take much longer." "Then it takes longer." One of the other men stepped forward. "We're on a tight schedule, and you should have planned better." The tension was back. Thomas stood his ground, positioning himself between the men and the document case. Thornberry stared at him for a long moment. "You're making this very difficult," Thornberry said quietly. "I'm following security protocol." Thornberry reached for his phone. "I'm calling Commander Whitfield. Please do." But Thomas knew something was wrong. The way these men looked at each other. The way Thornberry's hand lingered near the document case. This wasn't a routine inventory. This was a reconnaissance mission. They were here to see what they'd need to access, copy, or remove later. And Thomas had just put himself directly in their way. The question was, how long could he keep them out before someone with more authority than him decided he was the problem that needed to be removed? Thornberry's phone call to Whitfield was brief and cold. When he hung up, his expression had changed completely. The pleasant mask was gone. "Commander Whitfield says you have discretion over documentation methods. So, we'll do it your way." He turned to his assistants. "Notebooks." Now, the men reluctantly pulled out notepads. They began moving through the vault, examining items, making notes. But Thomas watched their eyes. They kept drifting back to that sealed case. The one containing Elizabeth's final protections for Catherine and George. After 20 minutes, Thornberry approached the case directly. "I'll need to inspect the seal. Verify it hasn't been tampered with." "You can verify visually," Thomas said. "The case stays sealed. It's not sufficient for a proper inventory. It's sufficient today." Thornberry's jaw clenched. "You do realize I report directly to the King's Estate Office? That I have authority here?" "You have authority to conduct an inventory, not to open sealed documents." "Who gave you the authority to decide that?" "Queen Elizabeth did. When she sealed that case, She included instructions. It requires 3 senior members of the royal household to be present for opening. You're one person. It was a bluff. Thomas didn't know the exact requirements, but he'd heard enough from Lady Susan to make an educated guess. And from Thornberry's reaction, he'd guessed correctly. Thornberry's face reddened. This is obstruction. This is protection. For a moment, Thomas thought Thornberry might physically try to push past him. But then, one of the assistants spoke up. Richard, we have enough for the report. We should go. Thornberry stared at Thomas for several long seconds. Then he snapped his briefcase shut. You're going to regret this, perhaps, but I'll sleep well tonight. The men left. Thomas sealed the vault and returned to his post. His hands were shaking again. He'd just made another enemy. Another powerful person who would remember his face, his name, his refusal to bend. But he'd protected the vault. For one more day, that evening, as his shift ended, Thomas received a visitor. She appeared so quietly he almost didn't notice her. Princess Catherine herself, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, scarf covering her hair. Thomas immediately straightened. Your Royal Highness? Catherine smiled gently. At ease, Thomas. I'm not here officially. Ma'am, this area is restricted, I know. I won't stay long. I just wanted to thank you. Thank me. I know what you did. What you've been doing? Protecting my children's future. Our future. I was just following protocol, ma'am. Catherine stepped closer. In the dim corridor light, Thomas could see the strain in her face, the weight she carried. Can I tell you something, Thomas? Something I don't tell many people? Of course, ma'am. When I married William, I knew life would be difficult. I knew there would be scrutiny, pressure, expectations, but I didn't understand how vulnerable we would be, how quickly people would forget that we're just a family trying to do our best. Duh. Asterisk. Her voice wavered slightly. Queen Elizabeth understood. She saw what could happen to us if certain people had their way. She put protections in place not because she loved us more than others, but because she knew we'd need them. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't just about documents and inheritances. This was about a mother protecting her children. A woman protecting her family's ability to survive in a world that often seemed designed to tear them apart. George is 10 years old, Catherine continued. He's just a boy. He likes football and video games. He doesn't understand that people are fighting over his inheritance. That there are lawyers and advisors who think billions of pounds shouldn't be set aside for him. He's the future king, ma'am. He's my son first. Catherine's eyes glistened. And I need to know that if something happens to William, if something happens to me, that my children will be protected. That they'll have what they need. That Elizabeth's wishes will be honored. They will be, ma'am. I promise. Catherine reached out and briefly touched his arm. Thank you, Thomas. You have no idea what that means to us. Then she was gone, disappearing down the corridor as quietly as she'd come. Thomas stood alone, feeling the weight of her gratitude and her fear. He wasn't just guarding a vault anymore. He was guarding a family's future. A little boy's security. A mother's peace of mind. But the next day brought news that changed everything. Commander Whitfield called Thomas into his office again. This time, he was alone. His expression was grave. The king has made a decision, Whitfield said without preamble. The vault will be opened in 3 days. Full inventory and review. The king himself will be present, along with the queen consort, estate lawyers, and representatives from the Duchy of Cornwall. Thomas felt the floor drop beneath him. Sir, the documents will be examined. The king wants to understand exactly what his mother put in place and whether adjustments are needed. Adjustments. The estate is complex, Harlow. The king needs to know all his options. Thomas's mind raced. Is the Princess of Wales aware of this? Whitfield's expression darkened. That's not your concern. With respect, sir, it is my concern. Those documents were created to protect her and her children. Those documents were created by a woman who's no longer here. The king has every right to review his own family's estate, even if it means undoing his mother's wishes. Whitfield stood abruptly. You're out of line, Harlow, am I? Or am I the only one willing to say what everyone's thinking? The silence was crushing. Finally, Whitfield spoke, his voice low. In 3 days, you will open that vault. You will allow full access, and you will not interfere. Is that understood? Thomas felt everything he'd fought for crumbling. Understood, sir. But as he left the office, one thought consumed him. 3 days. He had 3 days to find a way to protect those documents before they were exposed, copied, challenged, and potentially destroyed. 3 days to save Kate and George's future, and he had no idea how to do it. Thomas spent the next 2 days in agony. He went through his duties mechanically, guarding the vault, knowing that soon it wouldn't matter. In 3 days, everything Elizabeth had protected would be laid bare. On the second night, his phone rang again. The same unknown number. Time is running out, the voice said.
I know.
What can I do? The king himself is ordering this. The king is being pressured by his wife, by financial advisors who see billions locked away, by people who think family unity means redistributing everything equally, so it's over. Not necessarily. The voice paused. There's something you should know. The documents Elizabeth sealed have a failsafe. Thomas's heart jumped. What kind of failsafe? If the documents are accessed before William becomes king, they trigger an automatic legal review. A provision, Elizabeth included. It means any changes or challenges must go through a special tribunal that includes representatives from Parliament, the church, and the royal household. It's designed to prevent exactly what's happening now. Pressure tactics. Rushed decisions. Does the king know this? I don't think so. The lawyers certainly know, but they're hoping to access the documents, copy them, and find a way around the provision before anyone notices. How do I stop that? You can't, but you can make sure the right people know it's happening. People who will hold everyone accountable. Who? William. He needs to know. If he knows the vault is being opened, he can be there. He can invoke his right as the direct heir to ensure his mother's wishes are followed. I can't just call the Prince of Wales. No, but someone else can. Thomas understood. Lady Susan. She has access. She has credibility. And she loved Elizabeth enough to fight for her legacy. The line went dead. Thomas stared at his phone. It was risky. If he went to Lady Susan and this all blew up, he'd be finished. Not just fired, potentially prosecuted for insubordination, for interfering in royal family matters. But if he did nothing, Catherine and George would be vulnerable. Elizabeth's final protections would be dismantled. And a little boy who just wanted to play football would grow up to find his inheritance challenged. Questioned, reduced, Thomas made his decision. The next morning, he requested a brief leave to attend a personal matter. It was granted. He drove to Lady Susan's residence, a modest townhouse in Kensington. When she answered the door, she didn't seem surprised. I wondered if you'd come, she said, inviting him in. Thomas explained everything. The vault opening, the lawyers, the pressure on the king, the fail-safe provision. Lady Susan listened carefully, her expression growing darker. When he finished, she stood and walked to her desk. She picked up her phone. I'm calling William directly, she said. Will he take your call? He always does. Thomas listened as she spoke. Her voice was gentle, but firm. She explained the situation without dramatics, stating facts, expressing concern. She mentioned the fail-safe, the tribunal provision, the importance of being present when the vault opened. When she hung up, she looked at Thomas. He's coming. He'll be there tomorrow. Thomas felt overwhelming relief. Thank you, my lady. Don't thank me yet. This will get ugly. Camilla will see this as a betrayal. The king may see it as interference. William may see it as his family tearing itself apart. But the documents will be protected. Or perhaps we've just started a war that will damage everyone. The next day arrived too quickly. Thomas stood at his post as people gathered. The king looking tired and uncomfortable. Camilla, her expression unreadable. Thornberry and his legal team. And then, to everyone's visible surprise, William. He walked in with quiet authority, still dressed from an official engagement. His eyes found Thomas briefly. A slight nod, acknowledgement. The king spoke first. "William, I didn't know you'd be joining us. This is my mother's vault," William said calmly. "I thought I should be here." Camilla's face tightened. "This is family business." "I'm family," William replied. The tension was immediate. Thomas unlocked the vault, and everyone filed inside. The legal team moved toward the sealed case. Thornberry reached for it. "Wait," William said. Everyone stopped. "Before we open that, I want everyone to understand what's inside. My mother didn't create these documents carelessly. She created them to protect the direct line of succession, to ensure that future generations would have what they need to serve the country. If we're about to examine them, potentially challenge them, I want that on record." The king shifted uncomfortably. "No one's challenging anything, William. We're simply reviewing, are we?" William looked at Camilla. "Or are we looking for ways to redistribute assets that were specifically designated for my family?" The silence was deafening. Camilla spoke, her voice controlled but strained. "Your mother had her priorities, but she's gone. The world has changed. The family has changed. Is it really fair that billions are locked away for your children, while others receive nothing?" "My children will be monarch and spares," William said quietly. "They'll carry burdens your children will never have to bear. My mother understood that. She protected them accordingly." "And what about unity?" the king asked softly. "What about the family working together?" "Unity can't come at the expense of security," William replied. "I'm sorry, father, but I won't allow mother's wishes to be dismantled because it's inconvenient," Thornberry spoke up. "Your Highness, with respect, there are legal provisions that require review, including the tribunal provision," William interrupted. "The one that requires parliamentary oversight if these documents are challenged before I become king. That provision, correct?" Thornberry's face went pale. "You're aware of that. I am now." The king looked between his wife and his son. The weight of the moment was crushing. Finally, he spoke. "Hey, seal the case." "We're done here." Camilla's eyes widened. "Charles, we're done," the king repeated more firmly. "My mother's wishes stand. If issues arise in the future, we'll address them properly, through the correct channels, with full transparency, but not like this." He looked at Thomas. "Secure the vault." Thomas moved quickly, ushering everyone out. As the legal team filed past, Thornberry wouldn't meet his eyes. William was the last to leave. He paused beside Thomas. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Just doing my duty, sir. Your duty saved my family today." Then he was gone. Thomas sealed the vault, his hands steady for the first time in days. The corridor returned to its usual silence. Above him in the palace rooms, conversations would continue. Tensions would remain. Camilla would not forget. The king would struggle with divided loyalties. But in that vault, behind that door, Elizabeth's final gift to her great-grandson remained protected. A little boy named George would grow up secure. Kate would have the protection she needed. And a grandmother's love, expressed through legal documents and royal seals, would endure. Thomas resumed his post. Just a sentry. Just a man doing his job, but for one moment. In that ancient corridor beneath Windsor Castle, he had been something more. He had been the guardian of a promise, the protector of a future, the last line of defense between power and principle, and he had held the line. The vault remained sealed. The inheritance remained protected, and Queen Elizabeth's wish, whispered from beyond the grave, had been honored at last.